I can't keep working under a dropout like you. I should at least be making 5 times my current salary. We, graduates of Oxford University, struggle to keep up with a dropout leader's intelligence. It's absurd that someone as uneducated as you is even the leader. I, the leader of a project team at a certain company, was confronted by 7 Oxford graduates who had come to my desk first thing in the morning. Give me a break. Asking for 5 times their salary right at the start of the day. Are they serious? I'd been constantly troubled by the arrogant behavior of these Oxford graduates. Every day, I endured the humiliation of being looked down on and mocked because of my background as a dropout. Then one day, I caught some of the Oxford graduates drinking alcohol in the office, and when I reprimanded them, their leader, Edwards, exploded in anger. You're always so annoying, you dropout. Someone as dumb as a dropout shouldn't be ordering us around. He spewed a stream of insults I could hardly bear to listen to. Later, he and his cronies gathered and threatened to quit unless their salaries were increased by 5 times, which was shocking. All right then, I'll talk to the CEO about it, I said. The CEO accepted their resignations, and the Oxford grads were left pale-faced. But the very next day, an even more shocking turn of events occurred. My name is Antonio Watson. I'm a 35-year-old company employee. I work for a major general trading company in New York. It's one of the 5 largest trading companies in the U.S., dealing in energy businesses like natural gas and oil, as well as automobiles, the food industry, machinery, chemicals, and integrated urban development, with business operations worldwide. I belong to the food industry group, where I'm involved in the production, processing, sales, and development of health foods, targeted mainly at the senior population. Antonio, you work for that famous major company, right? That's amazing. That's the kind of admiration I often get from old friends or acquaintances when I meet them after a long time. But personally, I don't have any title or achievement to particularly boast about. I just see myself as an ordinary salary man. What sets me apart from others, perhaps, is how I got here. My life has been somewhat unique. I suppose most people go through high school or university, participate in job hunting, graduate, get hired by a company, and enter society with fanfare. But I didn't take that path. I'm just grateful they hired a dropout like me as a full-time employee. I often say with a laugh when talking about work with friends and acquaintances, yes, I was a dropout, but I never felt ashamed of my education, though. However, these days, being a dropout is rare, and when I tell people, they usually react with surprise. There were good reasons for my dropping out, and it was a path I chose myself. Let's go back about 22 years. I was 13 at the time, just starting middle school. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Sunday. Antonio, Mom and Dad are going shopping. Do you want to come along? No, I'm good. You guys go ahead. I had just entered middle school and was going through my rebellious phase, combined with adolescence. I was at that age when going out with my parents felt awkward. I see. Okay. Vincent, what about you? Are you coming with us? Yay, I'll go with you. My younger brother, Vincent, who was 2 years younger than me and in the 5th grade at the time, responded with an innocent smile. Quite the opposite of me. Antonio, instead of just lazing around at home, why not go out with Dad and us? Staying at home all day must be boring, right? Ugh, you're so annoying. Just go already. All right. We'll be back later, so take care of the house. I coldly brushed off Dad's invitation. And with that, Mom said they were leaving, and all 3 of them walked out of the house together. That was the last time I would ever see Dad, Mom, and Vincent. On their way back home, their car collided head-on with a large truck whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. The accident scene was reportedly horrific. The truck driver, my dad, Mom, and my little brother Vincent all lost their lives. When I received the call from the police and rushed to the hospital, unable to accept the reality, I saw the unrecognizable remains of my family and screamed and cried at the top of my lungs. With the help of my relatives, I somehow managed to get through the funeral and other necessary arrangements. Antonio, if you'd like, you can come live with us. That's what my Aunt Carol offered me. And I was taken in as an adopted child by my father's older brother and his wife. Suddenly losing my entire family left me deeply scarred. But Uncle David and Aunt Carol supported me. Antonio, this is tough. You don't have to go to school for a while. And if there's anything you need, just tell me. From now on, I'll be like a mom to you. I'll always be here to help. So don't hesitate. They spoke kind words to me, trying to help me regain my strength. Antonio, let's play. David and Carol's house was also home to my cousins, two younger siblings who were even younger than Vincent. I became their playmate and helped take care of them. Gradually, the days when I would cry and shut myself off from the world started to decrease. And before long, I found myself able to smile naturally again, just like I used to. I owe that to David, Carol, and my cousins. Being taken in by such a wonderful family was truly a blessing, and I'm still deeply grateful for it to this day. Antonio, it's so nice to see you smiling more these days. I'm so happy. It's all thanks to you, Carol. I don't know what would have happened to me if it weren't for you. I'm truly grateful. 2 years passed since that horrific accident, and by the time I entered my 3rd year of middle school, I had largely regained my emotional well-being. However, even at that young age, I understood that the cost of raising me was putting a strain on their household finances. I was essentially like a 3rd child that David and Carol had never planned for. Our life wasn't poor, but it wasn't particularly wealthy either. We were always mindful of saving money. In fact, shortly after taking me in, Carol, who had been a housewife, started working part-time. I get bored staying home all the time. I've been wanting to work for a while now. She said this with a smile, but I could see the exhaustion on her face at times. It was obvious she was pushing herself. Teacher, about my future. During the summer of my 3rd year in middle school, I handed over my career aspiration survey form during an individual consultation and confided in my homeroom teacher about the thoughts I had been keeping to myself. I explained that, as they already knew, I had lost my parents and younger brother in an accident, and that I was now living with my father's older brother and his wife. I mentioned that they had 2 children of their own, my cousins, and that I didn't want to cause them any trouble because I was grateful to them. I wanted to start working as soon as possible to help support the household, even if just a little. Despite being a middle school student, I had thought things through as best as I could. I wanted to at least contribute to the cost of education for my cousins, so they wouldn't have to limit their future choices. On top of that, I also felt a strong desire to repay them for everything they had done for me. I want to get a job. Those words, get a job, were written on my career aspiration form. A job, I'm sure you already know, but with only a middle school education, there are very few companies that would hire you these days. What do your parents think? David and Carol had said the same thing as my homeroom teacher. It's going to be tough to find a job. Don't worry about us. Why not go to high school like everyone else? Exactly. We'll figure out the money. You don't need to worry about that, Antonio. That's what they said to me. but I didn't want to be a further burden on my family. I was determined to start working as soon as possible, and after much persuasion, I managed to push through the opposition from my family and those around me. And so I set off into the working world as a middle school dropout. A dropout. Sorry, but we don't hire anyone without at least a high school diploma. I'm afraid you'll have to look elsewhere. In this day and age, if you've dropped out, there's bound to be some kind of problem. We can't risk hiring someone who might cause trouble down the road. No matter how many companies I contacted, most of them turned me down after just a phone call. Even if I sent in my resume, it was often rejected, and it was rare for me to even get an interview. As for being hired, that was out of the question. Looking back now, I realize how reckless and naive I had been. I deeply regret my lack of foresight. I started to understand firsthand the harsh reality that David, Carol, and my homeroom teacher had warned me about. As I approached graduation, I hadn't been hired by anyone. The days of sending out resumes and getting rejected continued. With no job in sight, I couldn't just sit around doing nothing, so I decided to try my hand at part-time work until I could find a full-time job. However, even getting a part-time job proved difficult as a dropout. Eventually, David, seeing my struggle, introduced me to a job at a factory through a friend. What am I doing with my life? I talked so big about getting a job and paying them back, but I can't even find a part-time job on my own. How pathetic. There were nights when I cried into my pillow, feeling ashamed of myself. At the factory, the work was simple enough for a middle school graduate like me. Most of my tasks involved sorting health food samples to be shipped nationwide. Starting today, I'll be working here. My name is Antonio Watson. Nice to meet you. At the workplace where I, a dropout, started working, there was no one to greet me warmly. In fact, some people, who had probably already heard that I was a dropout, looked at me with cold eyes. Most of them were older than me, high school or college students. I told myself that I was just imagining those looks and began working, but it didn't take long before the harassment started. Hey, dropout, where do you think you're looking? Don't just stand there. How long are you going to take? Hurry up, dropout. They'd bump into me on purpose and then shout at me. Even though I was still new and just learning the job, they'd crowd around me, demanding that I work faster. To make matters worse, they would hide my work shoes or name tag. Can you believe he's a dropout? What a joke. How dumb can he be? Did you cause some kind of trouble back in middle school? There's no way someone would drop out these days unless something was seriously wrong. I overheard them gossiping about me, laughing crudely. Each time, I gritted my teeth and forced myself to endure it. I can't let this make me run away. I finally managed to find a place to work. There's no way I'm quitting this easily. The work itself was simple, but the sheer volume of the samples to be sorted was overwhelming. I worked almost every day, learning the bare minimum of communication and the unspoken rules of society. For someone like me, who had never worked before, even that was challenging and took some getting used to. As I continued to push through, sweating and struggling on the fringes of society, I reached the age of 18 without ever finding a full-time job. Although I was contributing my earnings to the household, I grew increasingly anxious that I hadn't yet secured a steady job, one that would reassure David and Carol. There was also little chance of being hired as a full-time employee at the factory, given their business policy, leaving me feeling more and more hopeless. One day, as I finished my shift at the factory and headed to the break room for a late lunch, I noticed that the other employees had already eaten. Only one man in a suit was sitting there. I had seen him a few times before. He appeared to be in his 40s or 50s, always impeccably dressed in an expensive-looking suit, with neatly styled short hair that gave off a clean, polished vibe. He often worked on a laptop and had a composed, professional aura, but his expression was always gentle. I wondered if he worked at the factory, but then again, I didn't see him every day, and he didn't seem like the type to do manual labor. As I glanced at him, perhaps sensing my gaze, he looked up and met my eyes. "Oh, good work today," I stammered as I greeted him. "Good work," he replied, his expression briefly surprised, but then softening into his usual calm demeanor. "Grabbing lunch now?" "Yes, my work ran a bit late." "I see. Well, good job today." "Oh, sorry for using the break room." "Don't mind me. Just take your time and relax." "Oh, no, thank you. Actually, I'm sorry for intruding." The man spoke to me as if we were already acquainted, having had almost no natural conversations with anyone in this workplace. It made me strangely happy. For a while, I quietly ate my lunch, the only sound in the break room being the tapping of the man's keyboard. After I finished eating, I sat quietly, trying not to disturb him. That's strange." That's when I heard him mutter to himself. He continued, saying and that's odd a few more times while staring at his screen. Is something wrong?" I hesitated, unsure if a part-timer dropout like me should even be talking to someone who seemed so capable and important. But seeing him in trouble, I couldn't help but ask. "Oh, well, I was in the middle of sending an email to the head office, but my screen froze." "That's odd. This has never happened before." As I looked at the man's computer, I noticed something. It was the same model as David's. I had borrowed his computer to search for jobs and create my resume. I often used it to look things up as well, so I had a fair amount of knowledge about how to operate it. "Excuse me, may I try something?" "Oh, sure." The man seemed a little surprised, but he allowed me to touch the computer. I had experienced a similar issue when using David's computer before, and I had looked up how to fix it. With a few familiar clicks, I quickly resolved the frozen screen. "Wow, that's amazing. Thanks. You're really good at this." "No, not at all. I'm just glad I could help." Feeling flustered from the man's praise, I found myself downplaying my actions. "Do you know a lot about computers?" "Not really. I just use one often at home to look for jobs and make resumes. So I just happen to know how to fix that." "Wait, jobs." I then shared my situation with the man. I told him that I didn't go to high school because I wanted to work, but finding a job as a dropout was much harder than I had anticipated. I explained that I'd been struggling to get hired and, in the meantime, had been working at the factory while continuing my job search. As the man listened sympathetically, I even ended up telling him about losing my family in the accident. He was visibly surprised, but he listened intently without interrupting. "You've been through a lot. Hang in there." I thought that would be the end of our conversation. After I finished talking, I realized that bringing up my family's tragedy might have been too heavy. I raised my head and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to burden you with all that. I must have made the mood really awkward." "No, don't worry about it. Thank you for telling me." The man spoke gently, wiping his eyes as he did. I saw a single tear fall down his cheek, and I was taken aback. I had been pitied by others before, but no one had ever cried over my story. I figured this man must be someone with a warm heart, full of empathy. You see, as I get older, my tear ducts have gotten weaker. Sorry for showing you something so embarrassing." The man chuckled as he wiped his tears, then casually reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an elegant leather business card holder. Actually, I'm with this company, he said. The card he handed me read O'Connor, and, above his name, the name of a famous company I recognized, along with the title CEO. "Why, you're the CEO." I couldn't hide my shock. Mr. O'Connor smiled and continued, "If you're interested, would you like to work at my company as a full-time employee?" Of course. It was such a sudden offer. Wait, what? Why me? Our company works with this factory. I come here regularly, and I've seen you working several times. I noticed how hard you've been working, despite being so young. Your desire to repay the people who've helped you, not everyone feels that so strongly. I like that about you. Still struggling to comprehend the situation I was in, Mr. O'Connor continued, "I don't know if our work aligns with your interests, but if you're willing, I'd love to have you join our company and help you grow." To me, Mr. O'Connor felt like a savior, offering me the chance at full-time employment that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It felt like a dream, and my hands trembled as I held his business card. From our conversation, I knew that he was more than trustworthy. Although I had some doubts about whether I could keep up in such a well-known company, my desire to follow this man was far stronger. There was no reason to refuse such an incredible opportunity. "I'll do it. Please, let me work for you." "Good," it's settled then. We shook hands tightly. The next 17 years flew by in a blur. Though I had little social experience aside from light work at the factory, the senior employees patiently taught me everything I needed to know. Unlike the factory, no one here ever bullied me or spoke behind my back because I was a dropout. Mr. O'Connor often took me with him to meetings with clients and social events, giving me opportunities to learn. There was an overwhelming amount of new information to take in, and I often struggled or made mistakes. But each time, I would think back to that first conversation with him, and I would push myself to do my best. I was fortunate to have good relationships with my colleagues, and as the years passed, I learned new tasks and could truly feel my own growth. "Antonio, you're doing great. It's clear that everyone around you is inspired by your hard work. Hiring you was definitely the right decision." Mr. O'Connor would occasionally offer words of encouragement like that. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had become someone recognized within the company. And now, at 35, I'm leading a new project focused on health foods for seniors. As I've grown, so has the company. Over the past 17 years, the business has expanded rapidly, becoming a large enterprise that provides stable salaries and bonuses. While the work is busy, the days are smooth sailing. There were people who trusted me, and that gave me a deep sense of fulfillment. It brought color to my life. Once, I was someone who couldn't find his place, lost in despair. Now I could say with confidence that I had repaid my late parents, my brother, and the family who welcomed me in when I had nowhere to go. However, those smooth sailing days slowly began to change with the arrival of a certain individual. "Mr. Watson, how's it going?" A voice suddenly called out from behind me, causing my brow to furrow instinctively. I recognized that condescending tone immediately, without even needing to turn around. "Mr. Watson, it must be nice. Just checking up on the progress of the team and getting paid for it. I'm jealous. While we're all out here busting our backs every day, you've got it easy, huh? Must be a sweet deal." His words, laced with malice and sarcasm, made me want to fire back. But I held my tongue, choosing instead to silently look at the man in front of me. The air between us grew tense, but I knew that no matter what I said, he would never stop talking. "Edwards, by the way. Nice to meet you." He had greeted me with that arrogant tone on his first day, around 6 months ago. As much as I hated to admit it, he had a striking face, with well-defined features, and he seemed to take care of his appearance, always maintaining a clean and polished look. He was probably quite popular with women too. Tall, but always giving off an air of superiority. He was 28 years old, and, unlike me, a high school dropout, he had an impressive background, being an Oxford graduate. Edwards had been hired mid-career, the kind of highly educated talent companies seek out. I can leverage my experience from my previous position in the same industry to support your rapidly growing company. I aim to grow alongside your company for my own career advancement. When Edwards was interviewed, he made an impressive pitch to the Human Resources Department. I heard he responded well. He showed a strong sense of motivation, and he had spirit. It seems these qualities were enough to earn him a place at the company. However, once he started working, the reality was quite different. In the 6 months since Edwards joined, I had found myself cleaning up after his mistakes countless times. Just thinking about it was enough to make me feel exhausted. Edwards seemed to have an excessive amount of confidence and never listened to others. But when it came to talking about himself, he would go on, speaking rapidly. Back at my old company, I became the top sales performer in my first year and even won the CEO award. My subordinates all looked up to me, and by copying my methods, their sales numbers improved. I wasn't even in the food development department, but one time I just randomly came up with an idea, told the company, and it got adopted. Honestly, I'm a genius. His self-centered stories never ended. We worked in a relatively large team, and while individual talent was important, teamwork was essential above all else. But he lacked the cooperative spirit needed to maintain that teamwork. This became particularly evident during our meetings. In our meetings, we each presented our strategic plans, but Edwards seemed more focused on criticizing the ideas of others, rather than presenting his own plans. Sorry, but I've been listening. And isn't that super inefficient? Do you even know what cost-effectiveness is? We don't have time to waste on stuff like that. It'd be way better to just follow my plan and get results right away. Despite his tendency to shoot down other people's ideas, the plans Edwards proposed were usually outlandish and impractical. Consequently, his plans were never adopted. Mr. Watson and the rest of the team just don't understand how good my ideas are, but I guess it makes sense. They're all less educated than me. I mean, I went to Oxford, after all. Each time, I'd hear him complain behind our backs. He had a considerable amount of self-confidence. "Hey, you're not listening to me," he would say, completely disregarding the opinions of others. Always trying to push forward without consulting anyone, including me, the team leader. "Hey, Edwards, you need to start thinking about teamwork. We work as a team, not as individuals. Stop only pushing your own ideas, and try listening to others for a change." Teamwork. Mr. Watson, isn't that just a pretty word? What's wrong with voicing my opinions? Are you saying I don't have the right to speak just because I'm new? Whenever I tried to reason with him, he would cut me off, as if he couldn't tolerate any opposition. It was impossible to have a productive conversation with him. While I could appreciate his positivity and persistence, his blatant disregard for others and lack of self-awareness were major problems, leaving me at a loss. "Antonio, is everything all right? You seem a little worn out lately. Don't overdo it, okay?" Carol, who had been able to return to being a housewife shortly after I started working here, would sometimes ask me with concern, after 17 years in the working world, I felt like I was facing the most challenging hurdle of my career. Hey, Edwards. Did you read my email? The deadline is today. You're the only one who hasn't replied. I walked over to Edward's desk, since he hadn't responded to the internal email I had sent out to the entire team a week ago. Oh, yay, I think I saw an email. All right, I'll reply later. You don't need to respond to the email anymore. Just give me your answer now. We're running out of time. When I said this to Edwards, who had responded lazily, he shot me a sharp glare. Mr. Watson, I'm busy too, you know. I don't have time to check every little email. His unprofessional attitude left me smirking in disbelief. From his lack of effort, his unrealistic ideas that ignored both budget and staffing constraints, to his disdain for others and refusal to listen. Dealing with Edwards was draining. In fact, trying to correct his behavior felt like nothing more than a waste of energy. It was simply exhausting, with no benefits in return. Despite my desperate attempts to persuade him over the past 6 months, my guidance and words seemed to have no impact on him at all. The employee sitting at the desk next to him, quietly doing his work, was also visibly fed up with Edwards. Sigh, there he go again. It was as if I could hear his inner voice. Mr. Watson, please talk to Edwards more firmly. He's wasted so much of our meeting time. I really don't want to work with him anymore. He's too selfish, and it's impossible to deal with him. Let's talk to the higher-ups and have him transferred to another department. It wasn't just him. I'd heard numerous complaints about him from other team members as well. Maintaining teamwork is one of the key responsibilities of a leader, but I had never faced this kind of difficulty before. Why is this happening? Before Edwards joined our team, I had never struggled this much to keep the group together. Sure, I had dealt with new employees who didn't understand workplace norms, but I believed we had always managed to work things out through open dialogue, trying to find a mutually agreeable path. But he was totally different. He didn't even recognize the established systems of this company as a path to follow. He was a runaway train, completely ignoring the rules, a huge problem. In other words, I understood the importance of adapting to the times and upgrading company values to survive in the modern world. However, at the very least, I wished he would accomplish the minimum level of work before making grandiose statements. After finishing the progress check with Edwards, who was displaying his usual lazy attitude, I sighed and returned to my desk, trying to refocus on work allocation. In the middle of this, I glanced over at Edwards, who wasn't engaged in work at all. Instead, he was fiddling with his mobile phone, smirking to himself. What on earth does he come here for every day? He often remarked how lucky others were to get paid for doing so little. Yet here he was, doing next to nothing. Even so, Edwards had his own circle of supporters within the company. They were all graduates of Oxford, like Edwards. Most of them were either his age or younger, comprising mainly young employees. There was an odd sense of camaraderie among them, and I frequently saw them communicating secretly with one another. During breaks, they would laugh loudly together, much like students during a school lunch break, with Edward seemingly raised up as a dependable older brother. Man, Edward is really something, isn't he? I really respect how he's not afraid to speak his mind, even to Mr. Watson, the team leader. He is smart, skilled, and good-looking. He's practically unbeatable. I think I'm in love. The younger employees, who now seem to cling to Edwards like hang-ons, used to be more obedient and followed directions without much fuss before Edwards joined the company. Whether they were influenced by Edwards or merely expressing long-held dissatisfaction, they had recently begun to complain or act like children whenever given instructions or corrections. With a sigh, I recalled an incident that happened about a month after Edwards started working here. Even in his first month, Edwards had displayed behavior that could only be described as reckless, forcefully pushing his ideas through. "Look, Edwards, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but stop proposing things to clients that haven't been decided yet. You don't know this company well enough yet. I don't care what it was like at your last job, but we have our own rules here. If you can't follow them, you won't last." I thought I was being firm but kind. However, Edward's response was far from what I expected. "Rules? I see. So you're telling me that cutting out inefficiency is something slow thinkers like Mr. Watson just can't grasp." What did you just say?" Edward's words made my blood boil. Although I had sensed that I wasn't particularly liked by him, this was the first time he had insulted me so directly. When he called me slow-witted, something clicked. His condescending, nasty attitude. It seemed like he had heard something about me from someone. Edwards, wearing a vile grin, continued speaking, as if mocking me further. "Oh right, I heard something about you. Mr. Watson, you're a dropout, aren't you? Sorry, I totally forgot." Well, that explains it. Though he usually spoke more quickly, whenever he made these kinds of belittling remarks, he would deliberately slow down and stretch out his words. It was obvious he was doing this on purpose, as if to ensure that even someone with lower academic credentials could understand. That made me even more furious. My academic background wasn't something I had hidden in the company. Everyone working with me knew about it. So at some point after joining, Edwards must have heard about it. And from that moment, he seemed to believe he held the upper hand over me completely. Edwards' behavior became uncontrollable from that point on. Sure, Edwards, a graduate of Oxford, was probably quicker on his feet than someone like me, who had dropped out. However, I was still stunned by how openly he insulted me. I was so shocked that my mind went completely blank, and I couldn't think of anything to say back that day. Edwards, with that same sickening smile, walked away, leaving me to stare after him. Unluckily for me, that entire exchange was witnessed by Edwards' cronies, and worse still, they seemed to misinterpret the situation, thinking that the hierarchy within the team had shifted because of that incident. From that point on, the gears of the team began to grind out of sync. Edward's fellow Oxford graduates started cherry-picking the tasks they wanted to do, and blatantly slacking off on assignments given by me. Their overall performance began to deteriorate. I couldn't understand why they would behave so poorly when they had such prestigious academic backgrounds from Oxford. As a dropout, I couldn't comprehend it. I didn't particularly care that I was a dropout, nor did I mind being looked down upon. But causing the company harm due to this was something I couldn't ignore. I wondered how I could change them. As a professional, what could I do to help them? I racked my brain, but no answers came. 6 months had passed since Edwards joined the company, and by that time, both my body and mind were exhausted. I wasn't unable to eat, but my appetite had significantly decreased, and I had lost 8.8 pounds. Even though I was tired, I couldn't sleep at night. My body felt heavy when I woke up, and I was plagued by a throbbing headache that felt like it was squeezing my temples. Still, I never missed a day of work. Then one day, something shocking happened. It was a Friday. I stayed at my desk, determined to finish the work I wanted to complete by the end of the week. Staring at my computer, one by one, my coworkers left for home, and before I knew it, almost everyone had gone. I finally finished my work late into the night, well past closing hours. It was already 7 p.m. I gathered my belongings and started walking down the stairs of the building. Our floor was on the 6th, so I descended past the 5th and 4th floors. When I reached the 3rd floor, I thought I heard laughter from the far end of the quiet building. I stopped in my tracks and peeked down the hallway from the stairwell. Most of the lights on the 3rd floor had already been turned off, giving it a slightly darker feel than usual. At the far end of the 3rd floor was the break room, which I also used frequently. The break room was mainly used during lunch hours, and almost no one went in there after work hours, especially at such a late time. Yet the light inside was on, spilling brightly into the hallway. Then I heard the laughter again. Someone was definitely there. Who could it be? I started walking toward the break room to check. As I got closer, the laughter became clearer. Young voices, and not just one person, but several people laughing. I opened the door. "What are you doing?" I barked as I stepped into the room, addressing Edwards and the others inside. There were 7 young employees, including Edwards, sitting around in the break room. I was taken aback. It wasn't just the fact that they were lingering in the office so late, chatting away. It was that each of them was holding a can of beer. The table in the center of the room was cluttered with empty beer cans and snack wrappers. A complete mess. Whoa, that scared me. "Oh, it's Mr. Watson. Don't sneak up on us like that." Edwards, as usual, gave me that nasty grin, looking overly pleased with himself. He took a swig of beer as he spoke, his face a little flushed from the alcohol. Several others in the group also had flushed faces. What do you think you're doing?" "What do you mean?" "Just having a little drinking party. We were talking about going out for drinks, but it's Friday, and all the bars were packed. So we thought, why not just buy some drinks and hang out here? It's spacious, and we can have fun without worrying about being too loud." Pretty smart, huh? Fun without worrying about noise. This is a ** workplace *. You can't just drink alcohol here. Come on, don't be so uptight. "What's the harm, Mr. Watson? You're still as rigid as ever." As Edwards said this, a few of his cronies suppressed their laughter. "And what about you, Mr. Watson? What are you doing here this late? Isn't the workday long over?" Edwards smirked, clearly coming up with something else to say, as his eyes glinted maliciously. "Wait, could it be overtime? Oh, you couldn't finish your work. Mr. Watson, you really are inefficient, huh? Well, I guess that's what happens when you're not as sharp. But hey, it makes sense you did drop out. Oh, I know. How about I take over as team leader for you? I'm sure I'd do a way better job than a dropout like you. After all, I graduated from Oxford. You've got to be kidding me. Stop belittling people." What was that? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that." His obnoxious laughter echoed throughout the break room. The sight of him and his cronies laughing along was like something out of a nightmare. This was supposed to be my place, a place where I'd finally found my footing. How had it come to this? I bit my lip, clenching my fists tightly. Well, let's save the work talk for later. "Mr. Watson, why don't you join us? We've still got plenty of beer to go around." As Edwards brazenly slung his arm over my shoulder, something inside me snapped. "Don't mess with me." I shook his arm off and shouted, "Do you even understand what you're doing? Do you realize what you're saying? Drinking alcohol at work, speaking to your superior like that, and the rest of you. Do none of you have any sense of decency? No respect for the basic norms of society?" It was the first time I had ever let my anger explode like this in the workplace. That's how far I had been pushed. The room, which had been filled with raucous laughter moments earlier, fell completely silent. I glared at Edwards, who stood at the center of it all. And then, "You're absolutely right," he muttered. In the next moment, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. For a split second, I didn't understand what had happened. Edwards had thrown a beer can directly at my abdomen. The beer splattered from the can, drenching my jacket, and droplets dripped down onto the floor. "You know what, man, you're always running your mouth. Do you even know what you're saying? You drop out. A dropout like you doesn't get to tell us what to do. You're the one who should stop acting like you're above us." Edward screamed at the top of his lungs, and then violently kicked the table. The crash was loud and sudden, and a few of the women in the group flinched in fear. "Eck, this sucks. I was having a good time drinking, and you had to ruin it. Whatever, I'm done. Let's just head a bar, guys. We've got a buskill here anyway." With that, Edwards started gathering his things. The cronies, seeing him move, scrambled to grab their own belongings in a hurry. "You can take care of the cleanup," he sneered at me as he became the first to walk out of the room. The rest of them followed quickly behind him, eager to leave. I was left alone in the wreckage of the break room. For a few moments, I just stood there, stunned. Then, slowly, I began to clean up the mess. When Monday arrived, I showed up at work a bit earlier than usual. As I sat at my desk, preparing for the day, a loud bang shattered the quiet morning air. It was the sound of the door being flung open with unnecessary force. I turned to see what was going on. A group of employees marched in, walking with long, deliberate strides. It was Edwards and his cronies, with Edwards leading the pack. They walked straight toward my desk, forming a line in front of me, all of them wearing smug, unpleasant grins. "Morning. What's the occasion, everyone?" Despite the incident from last weekend, they had the nerve to come up to me with those faces. I had to admit, their shameless audacity was impressive. In response to my question, Edwards, positioned at the center, began speaking loudly, as if declaring war. "Well, you know, despite how we might look, we do actually think about work sometimes. And, you know, we came to the conclusion that the reason this company's growth rate is so bad is because of our dumb team leader." Oh, great. What a ridiculous way to start the morning. Is he serious? They were probably trying to belittle me again by bringing up my education. Could it be that they were still upset about being scolded for the party in the break room? The immaturity was making me sick to my stomach. But the next thing Edwards said made me question if I was hearing things correctly. "We want our salaries multiplied by 5 times. What? Yay, you heard me. We can't work under someone like you, a dropout and a total idiot, unless we're getting at least 5 times our current salary. Honestly, it's absurd that someone with no education like you is even in charge." Edwards shrugged as he spoke, but the contempt he felt toward me was written all over his face. "This is insane." The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. Demanding a 5-fold salary increase out of nowhere was a completely unexpected turn. "If you can't accept our terms, then we'll all be quitting, just so you know." Edwards laughed carelessly, holding a brown envelope that had the words resignation letter scrawled across it in messy handwriting. Looking at the cronies, I saw that each of them was also holding a similar envelope. They wanted to make sure I knew just how serious they were, including Edwards. There were 7 of them in total, all mindlessly following his lead. 7 of you, huh? That's quite a number. Exactly. The company's gonna have a hard time without us. Right, this is your decision, then. All right, I'll take this up with the CEO. Edward's eyes widened in surprise, probably not expecting me to say that. But it was only for a moment before he quickly reverted back to his usual cocky demeanor. "Mr. Watson, you're being unusually quick about this today. Well then, please go ahead and take care of it ASAP." He spoke cheerfully, and then casually sat on the edge of my desk, turning his back to me. Ignoring him, I reached for the phone on my desk and asked to be connected to Mr. O'Connor via the company's internal line. Soon enough, the call went through, and I briefly explained the situation to Mr. O'Connor, without omitting a single detail. I even relayed Edward's demands exactly as they were. If these conditions aren't met, they've all said they'll resign from the company. Yes, all 7 of them. Glancing up from my phone, I noticed Edward's cronies nervously exchanging glances with each other, seemingly on the verge of laughter but trying hard to keep it in. As for Edwards himself, he had his back to me, absent-mindedly humming while bouncing his leg. "Sorry to keep you waiting. The CEO has something to say to all of you." Following the CEO's instructions, I pressed the button to switch the call to speakerphone. A familiar voice echoed through the morning office. "Good morning, everyone. This is O'Connor, the CEO. Thanks for all your hard work for the company. I've heard a lot from Watson. It sounds like you're finding the current environment unbearable." "That's exactly it, CEO. There's no way we can show our full potential in this team. I hate to say it, but Mr. Watson is totally unfit to be a leader. Every time we bring up a new, growth-oriented idea, he shoots it down and crushes it. With that kind of attitude, how can young talent like us ever grow?" Edwards began speaking rapidly, as he often did when trying to make his case sound more justified. He unleashed a torrent of grievances, listing every self-serving complaint he could think of. I just stood there in silence, letting it all wash over me. After finishing his long-winded rant to Mr. O'Connor, Edwards shot me a smug look, his face drenched in sweat, his breath heavy, and a look of triumph on his face. "Edwards, you really haven't changed, have you?" Feeling a wave of emptiness, I quietly muttered those words in my mind. I understand Edward's perspective clearly now. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. I sincerely apologize for not providing an environment that's satisfactory to you all. As Mr. O'Connor spoke, Edwards and his cronies all began to smile in unison. "Yes, we're getting that 5-fold salary raise." Edwards cheered loudly, pumping his fist in the air. "We did it. Mr. Edwards is amazing." The cronies, now unrestrained, began celebrating wildly. "And so I've decided to accept all of your resignations." What? It took a few seconds for Edwards and his cronies to register what Mr. O'Connor had said. The shock of it was too much to process. Finally understanding, Edwards let out a gasp, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The cronies froze, unable to comprehend what had just been said. A few seconds later, Edwards, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to say something, but Mr. O'Connor spoke before he could. "Please handle the necessary resignation procedures with human resources in the next few days. Thank you." With that, Mr. O'Connor hung up the phone. "This can't be happening. There's no way. This isn't happening." I had never seen Edwards like this before. He was in complete panic, looking like a completely different person. "Edwards, this isn't what you said would happen." "Exactly. How are we supposed to handle this out of nowhere? What are we supposed to do from tomorrow?" "I didn't sign up for this, Edwards. You said it'd be fine. You need to take responsibility." None of them had imagined they'd be so swiftly cut off by the company. They were completely blindsided. I only went along with this because you said we'd get a salary raise. We're fired. What are we going to do now?" Some of them turned pale, while others began to cry, realizing their mistake in blindly following Edwards. They all began to shift the blame onto him. "Shut up. You all made the decision to follow me. Don't pin all of this on me." He glared at everyone around him with bloodshot eyes. His forehead was drenched in sweat. His breath came in heavy gasps, and his limbs trembled like those of a newborn fawn. "Wait a minute. 7 people, right? If we all leave at once, what will happen to the project we're working on? Mr. Watson, you'll be in trouble too, right? And on top of that, we're Oxford graduates. Losing so many smart people at once would be a huge blow to the company, wouldn't it?" Edwards, desperate to salvage the situation, pleaded with me. Unable to accept the decision made by the CEO, the group now turned their anger toward me, with voices rising in agreement. "This company has grown a lot since I first started working here. That's why, as part of a new initiative to hire highly educated young talent as full-time employees, you were all brought on board. Today's young people are amazing. They grow at an incredible speed, have an exceptional ability to learn, and are curious about everything. Our company has many departments, and the CEO and I wanted to provide a place for young talent like you to find your footing here."
At my age, celebrating a birthday. It's just too much. Should I put a candle on the cake for every year? With that many, I'm not sure I could blow them all out. The woman in front of me glared, her face turning bright red. I wished she could understand my frustration. After all, my arms and legs were broken, and I was in pain all over. Yet, she just wouldn't let it go. But this ridiculous relationship will finally end. I hope she goes to hell. My name is Harper. I'm a 31-year-old office worker. After graduating from college, I got a job at a local company and met my husband, Henry, through a colleague. At first, he was just a quiet guy at the bar during our office parties. But after getting his contact from a colleague, he started reaching out, and we began going out for drinks and hanging out. One day, after a few such outings, a blushing Henry confessed his feelings for me. I felt the same way, so I happily accepted. After dating for a few years, he proposed. "My family is very close, and I want to build a warm home with Harper." He told me that. Little did I know, years later, I'd face such a nightmare. Starting next year, I'll be transferred. It's back to my hometown. I heard this from my husband a year after our marriage. I thought, so, the time has finally come. His company transfers him every few years. We currently live in my hometown, but not his. His family home is quite far, over an hour by plane. I knew about the transfers when we got married, so I was mentally prepared. I never thought of divorcing or living separately because of this. I've only ever left my hometown for trips or work training, so leaving was a bit scary. But knowing he'd be with me was comforting. My mom and the others are excited to see us more often. Hearing that made me a bit uneasy. And there was a reason. My husband has an older brother, Bil, who got married to his high school classmate, Sael, due to a shotgun wedding when he was 19. Bil, who had just started working, lived with his in-laws due to financial constraints. Their son, born around that time, is now in middle school. I sometimes wonder why they don't move out and live on their own. But it seems the reason is Mil and Sael. They're as close as a real mother and daughter. Before the transfer, we visited his family a few times a year. But after marrying, I couldn't just be a guest. I tried to help in the kitchen, but they'd say, "Oh, Harper, just relax. We've got this." Yeah, Harper, leave this to us. But, the hallway's a bit dirty. Could you clean it? They'd chat away happily after pushing me out. I didn't feel completely left out, but I did feel alienated. When I left the room, I could hear their laughter. Were they talking behind my back?
Well, there's a difference between a daughter-in-law of several years and one of a few months.
I hoped we'd get along someday, but every visit to my in-laws made me feel isolated. Seeing me with nothing to do, my husband would call out, "Come here, Harper. Let's drink together." Mil and Sale looked at me as if I was slacking off. Yet, when they spoke, it was with a fake smile. "We're fine over here."
What do they want from me?
So, every time I visited my in-laws, I felt mentally drained. Phil and Bil were kind, and Bil's son, Kenta, though a bit distant probably due to his teenage years, would respond if spoken to. "You two seem close, but Harper's here too. Include her in the conversation." Phil would often say that, perhaps out of concern. On such occasions, they'd invite me with a smile. "We were just about to call you, Harper." But once I joined, Mil and Sale would burst into laughter over some private joke. Did something happen? Even when I tried to join in, I'd get a dismissive, "Oh, something like that," from both.
It feels so familiar. Oh, I remember.
In school, after a fight with a friend, she spread rumors about me, and all the girls in class ignored me. Yet, in front of the teacher, they acted like best friends. The feeling at my in-laws was eerily similar. But I'm an adult now, in my late 20s to early 30s. Acting childish at this age. From then on, I stopped trying to get close. My husband noticed the tension between me, Mil, and Sale. "You don't have to force yourself. My mom and Sale are acting childish," he'd say, always on my side. He once confronted them about their attitude towards me, but it didn't change. I asked him not to bring it up anymore, not wanting to make things worse. After my husband's transfer, I left my longtime job. With no kids, I didn't plan to be a homemaker. I started job hunting immediately after moving, and was fortunate to find a full-time position close to home. Starting at a new company was nerve-wracking, but my colleagues and boss were kind and welcoming. After the cold treatment from Mil and Sale, this warmth was comforting. However, a new issue arose. Frequent messages from Sale. "Harper, you haven't visited in a while. Are you busy? As your senior in marriage, I think visiting is a form of respect, don't you think?" There was so much written about it. At first, I was happy to hear from Sale and replied promptly. She'd always respond within minutes. But with work, I couldn't always check my phone. Despite not replying, Sale kept messaging. One lunch break, I found 10 messages from her. It was a bit unsettling. Is she that free? Eventually, my delayed responses upset her. "Are my messages bothering you? I get it. Fine then." After that, the messages stopped. When I talked to my husband, he said, "This is pretty insane. My brother mentioned it too. It seems Sale has a really short temper. This is pretty insane. My brother mentioned it too. It seems Sale has a really short temper." One moment she'd send me an angry message, and the next, she'd apologize. Then she'd get angry again. I thought, she must be so busy. Perhaps because of her temperament, I heard that the Bil couple often argue. Even when Sale is clearly in the wrong, Mil intervenes, making things worse. Weren't they a close-knit family? When I asked my husband, he said that ever since Sale got married, the atmosphere at home started to change.
Mil always wanted a daughter and adores Sael. I thought, I'm a woman too, right? But I had no desire to get close to such people. I just wanted them to do their own thing. But then, out of the blue, I got a call from an unexpected person. It was Mael. I was a bit taken aback, but I took a deep breath and answered.
Hello, Harper?
Mael, with a slightly cheerful voice, said. She's having a birthday party soon. And would love for my husband and me to attend.
Oh, you don't have to bring a gift or anything?
She repeated that 3 times during the call. So, she's basically saying,
come celebrate my birthday and bring a gift.
I've never been invited by the birthday person themselves before. Typical of her, I thought.
I'll have to check with Henry when he gets home,
I replied. Mil said,
if it's really not possible for both of you, just you will do. And don't worry about the gift.
With that, she hung up. I have work too, but it seems she's already decided I'm attending. Usually, she'd want both of us there, but she must really want a gift this time. I sighed. When I discussed it with my husband after he came home, he said he had an important business meeting that day and couldn't make it. When I informed Mael, she said, that's fine. Just you, Harper. I'll be waiting. And she hung up. I mean, I have work too. I could have chosen not to go, but I thought I'd try to fulfill the duties Sael always talks about. So, I decided to attend alone. By then, I had some paid leave, which I reluctantly used. Before I knew it, the day arrived. I headed to my in-laws' house earlier than the time mentioned. When I entered, Sael was busily cooking. It was awkward since we hadn't met since that message. I greeted her, but she didn't respond. In the living room, an excited Mael was eagerly waiting. She had asked me to decorate the room, so I hung up the various decorations I bought. She just stared at them in silence. I wish she'd go somewhere else. It looks plain and cheap. She whispered that so I could hear and quickly went to the kitchen. After a while, Sael came into the living room and said,
Hey, can you get the cake? I'm tied up right now.
She glared at me, looked around the decorated room, and muttered, lacks charm. I felt embarrassed being told that.
I'll finish up here and then head out,
I said. Sael laughed and replied, with these unimpressive decorations, what's the point now?
You should have said something sooner.
Not wanting to provoke her further, I took the reservation slip for the cake she handed me with a dismissive gesture. Feeling a bit annoyed, I headed to the front door.
Oh, by the way, I told them you'd be paying today,
she said, and then slammed the door behind me. Really? She couldn't have said that any differently? I considered just leaving, but I thought better of it and headed to the nearby bakery with a heavy heart.
Here it is,
the clerk said, showing me the cake. I was taken aback. It was a custom-made cake, large enough for a crowd. Surrounded by whipped cream and fruits, there was an illustration of a family in the center. Seeing it made me incredibly sad. It was based on a family photo taken during my first visit to my in-laws. But I wasn't in the cake's illustration. Sael probably requested to exclude me. The clerk, noticing my reaction, seemed uncomfortable. The bill was $80, which shocked me further. If I'd known the cake was this big, I would have driven. As I was walking back, I noticed a car swerving dangerously. Before I knew it, the car jumped the curb and headed straight for me. The pain hit me instantly.
Someone's been hit. Call an ambulance,
I heard a kind voice before blacking out. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. A doctor explained my injuries. A broken right arm and leg. Thankfully, my head was fine. The driver had fallen asleep at the wheel.
Do you have someone we can contact?
I gave them my husband's contact, as well as Mael and Sales, thinking they might be worried. I noticed the slightly crushed cake box next to me. I must have thrown it when I saw the car coming. I was dozing off when my phone kept ringing. Answering it, I heard,
"Where are you? It's my birthday. I heard you had a minor accident, but you're okay, right? Hurry back and help with the preparations."
She hung up without waiting for a reply. My broken arm and leg told a different story.
"I'm done with this family. They better brace themselves."
I pleaded with the doctor to let me leave, promising to return soon, and headed to my in-laws. With a strong ally by my side, I wasn't afraid. When I arrived, the two of them were waiting outside, probably eager to make a snide remark. As I transferred from the car to a borrowed wheelchair, Mael stammered,
"Wait, did you break bones? What happened?"
Seeing my injuries, she seemed genuinely shaken. My right arm and leg were casted, and I had numerous scrapes and bruises. It was clear to anyone that my injuries weren't minor.
"I came because Mael insisted. Here's your birthday cake. And good news, Henry came to support me."
Henry pushes my wheelchair. After finishing a business call, he had rushed over when he heard the voicemail from the hospital while I was napping. He was by my side when the call from my mother-in-law came in, shaking with anger as he listened to the conversation with me. He told me we didn't have to go, but I pleaded, and he humbly spoke with the doctor for me.
"Are you out of your mind? Look at Harper. How is this a minor injury? Tell me."
It was the first time I'd seen him so furious. My mother-in-law responded,
"No, you've got it wrong. I don't like answering calls from unknown numbers. The only reason I picked up the hospital's call was..."
She glanced sideways at my sister-in-law. It seemed she hadn't expected my condition to be this severe. And she hadn't anticipated my husband's arrival either, as she was at a loss for words. Then,
"What's all this commotion about?"
came a voice. With that, my father-in-law and others emerged from the house.
"What? Harper, you're seriously injured. I heard it was just a scratch from a fall."
All eyes turned to my sister-in-law.
"Well, anyone can mishear things."
She tried to defend herself. But such a transparent lie, nobody would believe it. My brother-in-law said to her,
"What were you thinking? Apologize to Harper." "Why should I apologize? I didn't hit her with my car."
She retorted. What a way to dig her own grave. The story about a scratch from a fall was a lie she made up. Let's just move on. Oh, want to see the cake? It's amazing, I said, and with my husband's help, I took the cake out of its box. Whether it landed just right or was secured really well, it was nothing short of a miracle. I was badly hurt, but the cake was nearly unscathed. Seeing the cake, my father-in-law and the others grew even angrier.
"Hey, why isn't Harper in this photo?"
Faced with this question, my sister-in-law, who had ordered the cake, desperately said,
"Oh my! It must be the bakery's mistake. I'll call and complain."
She tried to escape the awkward situation, but I stopped her. Wait a moment. Look at this. I signaled to my husband. In my phone's photo gallery was a picture given to me by a cake shop employee. It was probably the final design of the cake, and there was a big note saying, at the customer's request, cut out this person. My sister-in-law hadn't noticed, but the cake shop employee told me.
"Actually, I went to middle school with her. She used to ostracize me."
she's still doing such childish things. She had given me the photo, saying I could use it if I wanted.
Sister-in-law, you're still doing your foolish things even as an adult.
Everyone glared at her, except for my mother-in-law. But she alone said,
"Do you enjoy blaming her so much? She said it was a mistake."
"You're so unpleasant." She glared at me. Everyone wondered what she was talking about. Moreover, she had opened the present I brought while I was away and mocked the scarf inside, saying it was an unattractive color.
That's too bad. We put so much thought into it, right, Henry?
At my words, my mother-in-law looked puzzled. That's because the scarf was a gift my husband had spent an hour choosing at a department store since he couldn't attend today.
My mom and I both love yellow. We used to say we were alike because of it when I was a kid.
He shared such a heartwarming story with me. Yet, they treated him like this. My mother-in-law, trembling, shouted,
"It's all your fault. Everything. On such a special birthday."
She was so loud and obnoxious that I retorted,
"Act your age. It's just a birthday. Are you nuts? Should we put a candle on the cake for every year you've been alive? I'm not sure you'd be able to blow them all out."
I didn't regret saying it, because today would be the last time I'd see my mother-in-law.
"We're leaving. Mom, sister, you two are out of your minds. We won't be coming back here. We don't want to see you again. We don't need any inheritance. Goodbye,"
Henry said, pushing my wheelchair away. The family he once loved was nowhere to be seen. He chose me over his own parents. That made me so happy. The aftermath was chaotic. My father-in-law offered my mother-in-law a divorce. She didn't accept easily, saying,
"You should reconsider, FIL."
I thought, how dare she, but then my sister-in-law chimed in.
"Is this the time to worry about others?"
My brother-in-law said to her.
"What?"
My sister-in-law looked puzzled as my brother-in-law, like my father-in-law, proposed a divorce. Apparently, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been out partying from morning till night lately. My retired father-in-law took care of most of the household chores. He had been patient, thinking she had supported him for many years, but he was fed up with her attitude towards me and the fact that they had been neglecting their grandson, Kenta. Moreover, right after Kenta was born, my sister-in-law claimed she had postpartum depression and went back to her parents' house. It turned out she was lying and just wanted to party. When her parents found out, they disowned her. She had no place to go, so she clung to my mother-in-law. She also lied to my mother-in-law, saying I had badmouthed her. MIL, who easily believed that is also MIL. I was dumbfounded when I heard this. I hope those two malicious women live happily ever after. I don't need such a family. In the end, they couldn't come to an agreement.
"I'll give you the house. Do whatever you want."
And my father-in-law said. They agreed to divorce when they realized they'd get the house, but my ex-sister-in-law said,
"Make sure you pay child support."
To which my brother-in-law replied,
"Why would I?
I'm not giving you custody." She threatened to sue, but he had no intention of giving up custody, and Kenta said,
"I'd obviously go with Dad."
She was counting on the child support, but the divorce papers were already filed, and the divorce was finalized. You can't live on a house alone. I hope she struggles. A few months later, I was still working.
"We have an interview today. Please join me."
At my company, an employee always attends interviews to provide feedback.
Excuse me."
I couldn't hide my shock when I saw the nervous person who walked in for the interview. She was wearing a wrinkled suit and dirty pumps. clearly not dressed appropriately for an interview. To my surprise, it was my former sister-in-law. I almost laughed out loud. She must have been attending countless interviews and had forgotten that I worked here. Her interview responses were terrible, and it was clear she wouldn't be hired even if I didn't say anything. She had no work experience, and when asked about it, she said,
"I was taking care of my ex-husband's parents after our divorce."
I struggled to hold back my laughter. When my boss asked if I had any questions, I said,
"It's wonderful that you're so family-oriented. What would you do if, during work hours, you got a call from a hospital saying a loved one had an accident and needed you right away?"
I looked straight into her eyes as I asked. She avoided my gaze and replied in a soft voice,
"Of course, I'd go to the hospital immediately."
The interview ended after I thanked her. My boss asked about the intent behind my question. I explained everything, and he was shocked. Unsurprisingly, she wasn't hired. That was the last time I saw my former sister-in-law. Years later, I spoke to someone living near my former in-laws. They said the two women still lived together, but their constant shouting matches could be heard daily, sometimes even requiring police intervention. Apparently, my former sister-in-law could only get part-time jobs and never held on to them for long. They were scraping by on my former mother-in-law's pension. She chose her daughter over her son and husband of many years. I wonder if she ever regretted that decision. It's none of my business now. I still keep in touch with my father-in-law and the rest. We recently went on an overnight trip together. My brother-in-law's son, Kenta, is starting college in the spring. He's grown up so much, and it makes me realize how fast time flies. The only ones stuck in time are those two women. As I pondered this, my mobile phone rang on my way home from work. "Mom, come home soon." It was a call from my beloved daughter, whom my husband Henry and I were blessed with after everything. I couldn't help but smile.
"I'll be home soon,"
I replied and hurried home to my loving family.